Welcome to the Bare Essentials Podcast, where the talk is real and hibernating on your goals is not an option.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Charles Wallace. Today's guest is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Not only will we discuss his distinguished career in Jiu-Jitsu, but we will also talk about the inspiring story of his young daughter, Sophia. So please join me in welcoming James Booth to the show. Hey, James, thanks for joining. I really appreciate this. Been looking forward to this for a couple weeks, actually, to talk about some Jiu-Jitsu, your background, and some of your family life experiences from recently. So can't wait to get started. For those in the audience that may not know you, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's James Booth. I'm from like the Northeast Philadelphia area, and I'm a Jiu-Jitsu black belt under Daniel Gracie. And, you know, that's been my main passion, training and coaching people. So I coach at the Grindhouse in Bucks County, and, you know, just enjoy training. And then my family life, you know, my family is most important. I have 2 daughters, beautiful wife, and yeah.
Yeah. So James, before we get really into it, I like to do a little bit of an icebreaker with people. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. What's your favorite quote that you might gain motivation from?
That's caught me off guard with that one. There's I'm trying to think of a good one. There's a quote that like my family always jokes about myself, because things, you know, tend to work out usually for me. So they always say like, it's good to be good. It's better to be lucky, and it's best to be James. But you know, that's just kind of a family joke because, you know, it's like, I don't know, things always fall into place. I think when you do the right habits and things like that, things always seem to work out. And if you have the right people around you. So that's always like our family joke, is they always will say that to me.
That's a good one, though. I really like that, actually. So that was good. Thanks for that. That was the idea, too, to catch you off guard a little bit. So sorry about that.
Yeah. No, the only other one I could think of was the Spider-Man quote with great power comes great responsibility. So
that's a good one also. So James, I know you're Jiu-Jitsu black belt. I've known you for a few years now. As far as your athletic background, could you get into that a little bit, maybe prior to Jiu-Jitsu? Like, what was your athletic background growing up through like high school and college?
I was a basketball player. I did also dabble in some football. So I was a defensive end in football, and then I was a power forward / center in basketball. So I was the captain of my high school team, Calvary Christian. And then I ended up playing 1 year Division II for Holy Family.
Nice. Now, while you were doing basketball in college, when did you start jiu-jitsu? Was it during that, after that?
So the basketball thing happened kind of strange. I had hurt my knee pretty bad as a senior in high school, so I wasn't going to play basketball anymore. And I had surgery as a freshman, and I always had a real interest in mixed martial arts. So I was finally getting ready to like sign up. I think I was 19, almost 20. So maybe I was 20, and I was going to sign up. And then this opportunity happened to play basketball. I was doing my work study hours, and I used to work in the fitness center at Holy Family. And, you know, I used to play basketball with the guys after I had knee surgery, and I did pretty well. So I hit up the coach and was like, hey, do you want to pay me my work study hours to play against the guys? Like, you know, an extra guy on the team, like to practice with the team, but I would get paid and do my hours. And he was like, listen, James, I would rather you join the team right now. And then if you play well, you know, you could have a scholarship for the following year. So I played, and, you know, it went pretty well, but he got let go and a new coach came in, and the new coach was like unbelievably arrogant, and I didn't play anymore. And then that's when I full-time started jiu-jitsu, like right after that. So I had trained one day right before I joined the basketball team, and then I stopped because I was on the basketball team. And then I restarted in June. So right after I finished, I guess, my sophomore year in college, I restarted. And, that was, I think I turned 21 that summer. So, so when I was like 20.
Yeah. James, who did you start originally training under? Where was the first place?
So the first place I trained at was Rocco's Mixed Martial Arts.
Okay.
It was a different time in jiu-jitsu there. Like, it was only no-gi there. And it's basically just a bunch of tough guys slapping submissions on hard. And, we kind of learned that way. And then I did like 2 or 3 months, maybe like 2 months at BJJ United, because I had an ex-girlfriend, her brother trained there, and he told me I should train there. And I did, but it wasn't really my type of atmosphere. And it also was expensive and far. So I didn't really stay there. And then I started training like a nomad, kind of all over the place. So kind of with friends that I had met. So there was like a gym in Philly called Fight Sports that was like a bunch of tough guys. And I would train at like Pat Sabatini's basement of his mom's flower shop. And then, eventually Daniel moved to Philadelphia, and I met him at Semper Fi. Semper Fi was the only place I would drop in, and he beat me up so bad that I had to start training with him.
Nice. And James, is Daniel who you got your black belt under?
Yes. Yeah. So Daniel gave my black belt 6 years ago. Yeah.
Okay. And when you got your black belt, how long had you been doing jiu-jitsu?
5 years and some change. So 5 going on 6.
Yeah. And from what I've heard before, right, is that considered somewhat quick actually to get the black belt?
Yeah, it would probably be on the very quick end. Yeah.
So do you think that was because you just, or it might have been a combination, right? Did you just take to it, you really enjoyed doing it, and you found that you were just really, really good at it?
I would say the first year, I didn't make a ton of progress. It was like after a year, things started clicking a little bit. And then having my athletic abilities were kind of what made me good before I met Daniel. So like, I was just a better athlete than most people, and I could out muscle him, be faster, stronger. But then when I met Daniel, and he was stronger than me, and he wasn't necessarily faster, but he could slow me down, realized I wasn't that good. And then, I would say the main things that made me go so fast was Daniel's coaching style is very different. It's so much positional training and like working on the moves that you learned that day, as opposed to most gyms teach a class, you learn a couple moves, you roll, and you don't practice any of the moves that you did that day. So you don't actually like really get them into your brain. And then the other thing was the level of people that were in Daniel's gym coming up. He'd be bringing these guys from Brazil, like Roger Ambrosi, Marcelo Cruz. You name it, like these guys would be dropping in. And then he would take me up to Henzo's in Manhattan on Mondays. I was training with David Branch, Holes Gracie, Rafael Nadal, Sapo, you name Jamal Patterson, like all these guys that were, a million times better than me at the time. But I think they liked training with me because I was good at resisting and being strong. So kind of trial by fire. And then like eventually, it's your time. You stop being the nail and you become the hammer.
Yeah, I'm just going to give you this compliment. You may not have known this, but I remember from when you would help train my son. He always refers to now, because he wrestled in high school and college, and he's a pretty strong kid. He now refers to, when he talks about strength, there's his highest level of strength. He calls it James Booth strength. So I thought you might like to know
I
that.
like that.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm the highest, but I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Well, definitely for him, he calls it's James Booth strength. That's the scale. So, so James, during that time you were training, how was it as far as like competitions and things like that? Were you actively competing during that time too?
Yeah. So I would just compete randomly. People nowadays have it a lot easier. Like it's a lot easier to find out about competitions. And the only thing I would say that I was lucky, I didn't have a pandemic happen when I was coming up the belts. So like yeah, there was competitions, but you kind of had to find your own stuff. So like I would do the Nagas, I would do IBJJF, but the main thing, like I remember as a purple belt in Daniel's gym, I would lose to Hadra Ambrosi, like Jonathan Webb, Marcelo Cruz, like they would beat me like every day. And then I would go do a purple belt competition and it was a breeze. Cause like, I'm training with high level black belts, like world-class black belts, and, you know, Daniel as well. So Daniel is a world champion, and he was, you know, I was kind of his thing to get in shape. So he would just beat me up, but then rolling with someone my actual belt level was easy. And I remember I did about 3 years into training. It was Naga Worlds. It was in Newark, but it had like a massive turnout because the New York Open closed early. So I ended up in the finals against the current Nogi black belt Pan Am champ, and Diego Pereira. And, you know, I was just a purple belt, but he hit like an inside trip on me and I flying armbarred him and beat him really quick. Now, it was just one of those things. You train with high level people, you have to be really quick at your submissions because they're better than you. Mm-hmm. And he was obviously better than me, but I was used to training with people that beat me up. So I got lucky, and, you know, he never got that rematch either. So it was a nice win.
And James, one thing I've talked to a lot of guests that I've had on here about is adversity and mental toughness. And what I've noticed about this interview so far, which I really enjoy, is how you're talking about getting beat up with the biggest smile on your face. Was there any time during that though, right, that you're like, I don't know, like, do you ever get discouraged by getting beat up, or was it always it made you work harder?
I'm not going to lie. Some days after I would get destroyed, I would go to a gym where I knew I was better than everyone and just get all my wins back. So I needed to build I had to get some love. And yeah, so, you know, it's hard to not win any rounds. Like my rounds would be a round against Marcelo Cruz. He took second at the Masters World Championship last year. Like Hadra Ambrosi took third at the Black Belt World Championship in Nogi, I think. And then Daniel was a world champ. So like, I'm a purple belt. I'm not going to beat any of those three. And those were my same rounds every day. So yeah, sometimes I would want to train with an easier person occasionally, feel a little bit better, or do a competition where I could beat everybody and, you know, feel good.
And James, from that experience and basically getting beat up, have you found that in your teaching style, because you train a lot of different people now, is that something you're aware of as to when to maybe back off, when to maybe give somebody that win? Did you learn from that experience that you had?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was good, but you have to recognize what is that person like about. Like if they're really a tough competitor, you can push them to the limits. If they're a recreational person that goes to blow off steam after work, like you don't want to demoralize that person. But if I have a student come in and tell me he wants to be a world champion, I'm like, I have to crush you, because the guys that are winning the world championship in the gi, at least in jiu-jitsu, are like guys from Brazil who have no money to eat and they still train jiu-jitsu every day. So like, if you don't want it as bad as they want it, you're not going to win. So like, you have to recognize, and the people have to be honest with themselves too. Like if you want to do jiu-jitsu recreationally, that is great. I mean, I've only been doing it pretty much recreationally for the last few years with the pandemic and having kids and stuff. But if you want to be world class, you know, you have to be like a guy like Sean Brady, who does a 3 a day every day. Like he's a 3 a day every day, and then his rest day is like a 20-mile run. So like that's, you know, he enjoys that workout and that grind. So you could push someone like him, whereas opposed to like a regular guy that just wants to get a little bit better, you know, he doesn't need to work. He doesn't need to go crazy with, and you don't have to make him feel bad. Like you can train at a reasonable pace with them.
So I do want to ask you, since you brought him up, Sean, we talked a little bit ago about strength. Shawns Strength is actually legendary too, from everything, and I've seen him train. Is it as real as everybody says?
Yeah, he's stronger than me, without a doubt. He's got like, I mean, just on pure numbers, his numbers are ridiculous, but he's got like bear strength. I like to say I have the technical aspect. He has the ridiculous strength, but no, he's got very technical as well too.
If Sean happens to see this, Sean, I am cutting that soundbite out for you to have forever. James Booth admitting that you're stronger than him. So we'll make sure to get that done. So James, as far as you get beat up, right? I wanted to ask, now you get your black belt. The day you get that black belt, is it relief almost? Or is it, excitement, or did you know it was coming?
I had no idea. I was taking some high profile matches coming up. Like I was supposed to have a match against Tom DeBlas, but he had hurt his knee. So it ended up being a tournament for the good fight. He was the previous heavyweight champ of it. And then when he hurt his knee, it became a tournament and I won the heavyweight champ. And Gordon Ryan won the welterweight that day and John Calistine won the lightest weight. I had taken a match against a guy called Gibson Sa. Well, his name is Gibson Sa, and he really good black belt, had tapped out Buchecha as the brown belt, beat Adolfo Vera. I think he tapped out Hector Lombard, beat Jeff Munson, and world champ at Brown. It all happened because nobody wanted to do the match against him in South Carolina. So Brad Bolton hit me up and asked me if I would do it. And I was like, yeah. So I signed on to do a no-gi match with him. And I think Sarah McMahon was the co-main event. So as I was training to get ready, I was just a brown belt, was training no-gi that day. And Daniel was doing the promotions and he asked me to throw my gi on for the picture. So I threw the picture of my gi on and then he promoted me to black belt. But yeah, I didn't know because I had no stripes on my brown belt either. So like it was a little jump and I had this ugly yellow shirt on that I was training in because I didn't care. And I was like, that's my black belt picture though. So it was a surprise.
Nice. So James, how many, now that you're a black belt and you're doing a lot of training and teaching people, how many people have you awarded a black belt to?
3. So Matt Netterville, Chuck Gerber, and Amanda Levy.
And is that almost like a different feeling than getting your own black belt? Is that feel almost as accomplished in a different way?
Yeah, it's a really good feeling. It's nice to see your people, do well. I haven't ever taken someone all the way from white belt to black belt though. A lot of people I kind of took over their instructor and they were already had a base and things like that. And, we continued to train together and, promoted them that way. But like I have never taken someone fully from a first day white belt to a black belt yet.
So James, what I really wanted to get into also was, jiu-jitsu, you're a black belt, really used to, I would say in most cases, you're used to having control and being in control. I know recently the birth of your daughter, definitely something tough. How, for somebody like you who's pretty much in control, how do you deal with something that's so out of your control? Could you talk us through that a little bit?
There's not really much you can do. I mean, yeah, like I'm kind of a prayer guy and, the amount of people that reached out to me when my daughter was born, because, she was born at 1 pound at 27 weeks. I had so many people reaching out and I could kind of just tell they all were pulling for us. So, it was that support. And to be honest, like looking back, it's a blur. Like, I think you just go to autopilot and like, you do what you have to do to get by, but you don't have those memories. They're not as like, certain things will make you remember them, but I see my daughter now and I don't like think of like the tubes and all that stuff. So yeah, I think you have, as a parent, you do what you have to do and you just keep going.
And James, during that, I got to imagine, though, deep down, there's points during that where it's probably the scariest thing you're ever going to experience. Do you have nights where you're like, there's doubts and that you're extremely scared for her, for your family, your wife?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the thing was I was so exhausted all the time that like I didn't usually like when I eventually would lay down, I would pass out because it was just like too much stress. I mean, it started out with my wife went to a checkup and at 25 weeks, and they were like, all of a sudden the hospital's calling me. They're like, she's in labor. And I'm like, what do you mean she's in labor? This was like a growth scan. Like it wasn't, I wasn't even allowed to go with her because COVID was going on. So like I had my other daughter, Amelia, and she wasn't even one at, or no, she was one at the time. Yeah. So she was one. And I call my mom and I'm like, hey mom, like I need you to get over here and watch Amelia. Like I gotta get to the hospital. Like Brittany's in labor. So mom comes, I go to the hospital. They give her these drugs to like slow it down because 25 weeks, the like percentages were really bad. Like they did, they tell you all the kind of awful scenarios. And then, they stop the labor, but they're like, she can't go home. She has to stay here and go to the high risk thing. But the second you leave, you can't come back. And I was like, well, I can't leave my other daughter, like not with, she needs me too. Mm-hmm. So I stayed as long as I could. And then I left, and my wife usually did most of the care for my daughter, Amelia. So it was kind of just like on me to take care of Amelia. And then I would go to the hospital and wave to her from the ground floor. She was on the second floor. So then she was on high risk for like 2 weeks. Now I was lucky too. I mean, some days I would go and just drop her off things, and like my mother-in-law and my mother and my neighbor would help me, and my father-in-law would help me with Amelia. So like I could not have to take her every time. But yeah, like every night I was the one who had to give her a bath, put her to bed, all that. And then it was actually funny. I noticed that with the COVID, depending on who the security guard was, they didn't know all the protocols. So my wife had to take a glucose test, which was a really poor decision from the doctors when she's on high risk. They basically don't let her eat or drink for like, I don't know, 15 hours or something. But when you're high risk like that, like the stress of something. So I happened to just sneak into the hospital that day, and I snuck up into her room, and they're like, how'd you get in here? And I was like, oh, I was just kind of playing stupid. And that was when she went into labor because they forgot to take her blood. Like she was, dehydrated, and she started having labor pains. So I guess, it was going to be dangerous for Sophia. So they decided to do an emergency C-section. And the only reason I got to be at my child's birth was because I snuck into the hospital that day. So, then I was there, and, it's a terrible scenario because you're signing. They basically are like, all right, like, this is just the waiver. Like you have to sign, for, how to, we're going to do the best we can for your wife and your daughter, but like, we can't guarantee anything. Like either of them could pass during this procedure. And then, we got rushed into the C-section, and a C-section is pretty crazy. We didn't have that our first child. So yeah, it looked crazy. And then, Sophia came out, and they put her right into this bag to like keep her warm, but like it looked awful. Like it looked like a body bag. So then Britt was like asking me, like, she's like, well, can I see her? Can you see her? Can you see her? And I was like trying to stand in her way so she couldn't see her. Mm-hmm. And because I was worried she was going to freak out, and she wasn't like sewed up yet or anything. So yeah, it was just a pretty crazy experience.
Now, the good news is that Sophia's born. And I know it was still, you weren't out of the woods yet, but you had a long road of hospital and everything, but she absolutely a fighter.
Oh
And
yeah.
she, after she's born and you see her fighting, is there a point where you're kind of like, you know what, she's gonna be okay, and you feel better?
Yeah, it was long though. I'm like, we had her on a feeding tube for 11 months. Like, so yeah, it was she was in the, I think, the regular NICU for 150 days, and then like 30 more days in like a therapy hospital. Um, yeah, like I was just kind of waiting for the light at the end of the tunnel. Like she would seem good, but like, she was small and like didn't have like a good immune system. So like we pretty much had to just stay away from people. Like it was I had to like try to explain to people that like, I'm like, listen, I'm not scared of like a common cold, but like I can't even risk getting a common cold. So yeah, we just kind of lived in our tiny little micro environment, just our house, the hospital, our house, the hospital, and did what we had to do.
Yeah, and I know you're a pretty private person. I remember the day I read on Facebook you announced that she had come off the feeding tube, and and again, I just, it made me so happy to see that. But because you're so private and not really posting much along the way, I think people don't realize how much happens and what's going on that whole time. It seems like, oh, we had this, she's born 1 pound, then she's off the feeding tube, and then there's all this in between, all this
Yeah.
scary shit that you guys are dealing with. And James, honestly, I give you guys all the credit in the world, the way that your wife, you've come together as a family and you do whatever needs to be done to help protect Sophia. And the way she fought through it, and now she's doing well now, right?
Yeah, she's doing really well. And thank you. Yeah. I am a pretty private person. And I guess the point in time, which was actually the roughest for us, was when we took her out of the hospital. We were told that we were going to have a nurse because she had this feeding tube, and we had to place it down up her nose, down to her stomach.
Mhm.
And like, I'm not medically trained. Like, I have a jiu-jitsu black belt, but that doesn't mean I know anything about,
Right.
medical. My wife was a vet tech, so she had a somewhat of a medical background, but with animals, not humans necessarily. So they basically gave us like a 1-day training course on how to do it, and then they were like, but you'll have a nurse, so it'll be okay. So then insurance just kept denying the nurse. They said she wasn't medically complex enough. And I would say to them, I'm like, can you place an NG tube into someone's like stomach? And they would be like, well, no. And I'm like, well, you're asking me to do it. And they were like, well, they gave us this state insurance because her bills were obviously like millions. And they were like, well, just take her to the ER every time you need it placed. And I was like, there's like COVID, regular sickness. Like, she's a high risk baby. And you want me just to take her to the ER every time her tube comes out, because she could pull her own tube out of her nose like she's a baby.
Uh-huh.
And so we just had to we couldn't sleep train her because we had to basically rock her to sleep every night, because if she pulled the tube out, then we'd have to place it in the morning. And with placing it, like the baby, like Sophia would gag because you're going down her throat. So what you do with an NG tube is you go down the nose until you hit the esophagus, and then you have to blow on them so their esophagus opens up, and then go down to the stomach, and then you got to pull the stomach acid out of the NG tube and test it on a pH strip to show that you're in the stomach and not in the lungs, because you don't want to shoot food into their lungs. So we had to do that like every day. And yeah, that was the tough part, especially like she would sleep like, I don't know, an hour maybe, and then wake up. And then, so we would just take shifts. Like I would do the first 4, she'd do the second 4, and then, or vice versa. And then, just to repeat every day. Yeah, it was a long trip.
And James, I'm just really happy for you guys that it ended on a positive note. And I hear you tell that story, and I think back to when you're getting your ass kicked all those years. And it's so much tougher dealing with that. Like as a dad,
Oh yeah.
I can't even imagine. So much credit to you guys. And again, with you being so private, I think a lot of people don't really understand all that you went through with that and how much of a fighter Sophia had to be and what you and your wife had to do to make sure that she was okay. So the whole story in itself, you, your wife, Sophia, I try to get people on here that I want to be informative, but I also want to talk about like inspirational stuff. And, I was joking with somebody, Rick Henry, we joked about, you say that he's bigger than you. And I remember thinking about this, how like we think about jiu-jitsu, James, big guy, strong guy. And then we think about this little 1-pound baby and how tough she had to be to make it through what she did. So that's amazing. So glad to hear that. So James, now change topics now just a little bit. As far as what you got going on now, I wanted to ask you, do you have anybody now that you're training with, up and coming that is fighting amateur, pro, anything like that? Anybody you'd like to talk about?
I mean, Sean Stefanelli had a great fight last night. He got a rear naked choke in a minute. That was his first pro win. So I get to train, and work with him on Tuesday, Thursdays when he comes to my jiu-jitsu class. I don't have anyone that I'm like exclusively working with like 5 days a week or anything like that. I always have guys that come to my Tuesday, Thursday. I haven't at this point right now, I wouldn't say I am in like a head coach type role where I can completely control your training, where I'm more of in a specialist role, like where I would, fix some problems in your game. And that's on the MMA side. Jiu-jitsu wise, I can coach and, be fine there. But from the amount of time you would need to be a full-time MMA coach, I would say I'm more of like an added layer where I just, specialize on the ground and teach you some tips and tricks that make things a lot easier. We have a bunch of guys that are coming up. They're going to do amateur fights out of the grindhouse. And then I still get to train with a lot of the MMA guys at Daniels. And, I have a crew of friends that come in every Tuesday, Thursday besides my class. And, we just all get good training in. I think once my girls are a little bit bigger and I can balance things a little better, I could more take a head coach type role where I would be more involved. But right now I'm just kind of training when I can. I teach my 2 classes a week and then try to help people the best I can and kind of go from there.
And James, as far as where you're teaching at, could you let us know what schools? Is it just Grindhouse or is there other places that you teach class at also?
So I only officially teach at Grindhouse. If I'm at Daniels and he needs me to cover a class or something, like I covered a class 2-3 weeks ago, I'll, teach a class at Daniels for whenever he needs, but I don't have a set day down there. Like I'll just try to come down and get some training in with him. If it happens that he's not there or he needs to do something, I'm glad to teach the class as well.
Well, James, I can't thank you enough for talking us through a lot of jiu-jitsu. Obviously, I know people that tune in are going to want to hear about that, but I absolutely want to make sure we talked about Sophia and her story. I think that's as important. And I think people need, especially in this day and age, they need inspiring stories like that. And just makes you feel good. And it also, when you look at whatever may be going on in your life, it's always puts things in perspective. So thanks for doing that. I know that must not be easy, but I can't thank you enough. And I hope that everyone who checks this out really enjoys it. Anything else, James, that you want to plug or anything like that?
I mean, Grindhouse MMA, Daniel Gracie's, also love Rick Henry's gym. And, I like the guys at Saga. Those are good friends of mine. I just trained at Wise Jiu-Jitsu this morning and taught the class. Charles Wise owns that in Rio Grande, right outside Wildwood. That's about it.
Well, James, I can't thank you enough. So really, really appreciate this. Thanks everybody for tuning in. James, I hopefully see you soon. You take care. Okay.
You too. Thanks again.
This has been the Bare Essentials. Thanks for listening. And remember, never hibernate on your goals.